Today on With the First Pick, Pete Prisco's top 100 players list is live on CBSSports.com, and we're going to pick it apart. And since a big part of what we do here With the First Pick is on the NFL draft and roster building, we'll be particularly interested in the rookies and the young players on this list. I'm Ryan Wilson with Rand Carthon on vacation. Much deserved. I got my guy Lee J. Douzable here to help me out. This is episode 270. And Lee J., you may not care, but so some folks do. They're 310 days until the 2026 NFL draft. There it is. Hamster wheel had to get to work there.
Ryan.
Yeah.
Ryan, when do you start the countdown? Like, is it the day after the draft, or do you wait a couple days?
You'll find this hard to believe, but our buddy Rick Spielman, who is now with the Jets, demanded that it was a 24/7, 365 countdown clock, just so he would have an idea, because everything has to be exactly tailored to his needs. So it just stuck, even though Rick left us to go save your Jets. We still got that countdown board. Rand does not care that they're 310 days. You probably don't either. But that's what we got. How you doing, man?
I'm good, man. I can't complain. It's just crazy, Rod, to even think that literally real football is going to most likely be played in a month or so, right? It just feels like every year we always say this, that NFL is 24/7, 365. But this specific year really felt like that it was literally year-round. So it's crazy to think that training camp is right around the corner.
It gets quicker and quicker every year. And this is how fast I'm aging, Lee J. What were you doing in 2012? Where were you?
I was still playing. I was in Tennessee.
So you're in Tennessee, 2012, young buck in his 20s. That was that September 2012. My oldest son started kindergarten. Yesterday was his last day of high school. It happens like that. So I'm just saying, man. Blink of an eye.
Congrats, Ryan. Congrats. I'm going to give you a hand.
We'll see. I still got to pay for college, so don't congratulate me too much. CBS, don't keep me around now. Please do. All right, let's get into this thing. Let's talk about Pete Prisco's top 100 list. He does it every summer. And look, for as much trouble as we give Pete for being Pete, it takes a lot to make this list. And look, no one's going to agree with all 100 picks. And that said, I want to applaud him. But on the other hand, we're going to give him the business right here. So let's start at the top. Let's look at the top 10 here, producer Sharon. Let's see where we want to start poking holes into what Pete Prisco has done here. Number one, maybe it is a surprise to you. I don't know, Lee J., but Patrick Mahomes. So I'll start there. I know Patrick Mahomes wasn't the MVP last year. You could argue about Lamar and Josh all you want. I have no issue putting Patrick Mahomes here. How about you?
That's the thing, Ryan. We have to know what the parameters for this list is, because there's always a top 100 that comes out, and sometimes it's based off the previous season. Sometimes it's based off the total body of work. I would assume this is the total body of work, because that would only make sense for Mahomes to be number one, because the last few years, I know people have me on record saying it, I feel like he's kind of changed his way of playing to being more of a game manager, and because that's what the Kansas City Chiefs needed to win. They've been able to run the ball, lean on that offensive line. Now, they've struggled in protection, but they've been more balanced on offense the last few years, and he hasn't had the gaudy numbers. But you still have to pay some respects to Patrick Mahomes, right? 3 Super Bowl rings. A lot of people say he's already in that conversation as maybe the second best quarterback to ever play the game. I still think he needs to pass Joe Montana with rings to become the number 2 overall behind the GOAT, Tom Brady. So I wouldn't have put him at number 1, but I could see where Pete is thinking in regards to the full body of work.
Yeah, my mistake a couple years ago remember when the Chiefs started slow, and I said, oh, maybe this is the year that the wheels not come off, but maybe they come back to earth. And I learned two very valuable lessons that season, Lee J. Don't sleep on Andy Reid and or Patrick Mahomes if they're on the roster, because they'll find a way to get it done. So I'll ask you this. Let's assume that you are the general manager of the 2025 Cleveland Browns, and you can have Patrick Mahomes, you can have Josh Allen, you can have Lamar Allen or Joe Burrow. For one season, who you rolling with this current roster in Cleveland? Because that to me helps determine how we're going to make this list.
Wow, that's a tough one, right? Honestly, and people are going to look at me crazy, I'd probably take Lamar Jackson just because the lack of weaponry on that team and how dynamic he is with his legs. He's going to have to use his legs because he's going to be under duress. Now, Patrick Mahomes is Houdini. There's times where you don't understand how he gets out of the grasp of defenders and ridiculous arm talent as well. But I just think if you're talking about specifically this 2025 Cleveland Browns team, and I look at the roster up and down, I'm probably taking Lamar Jackson just because I know he's going to be able to do a lot of stuff off platform. But then when things break down, he's probably the most explosive player on the field with his legs. We're going to need that at the quarterback position because he's going to be under heavy duress.
I get that. And I was actually thinking a little bit for Josh Allen for those reasons, just to have tacklers bounce off of him. But then again, Patrick Mahomes does things that no one else on this list does.
Correct.
Joe Burrow does it occasionally, but Patrick does it more consistently, it feels like. All right, one last question before we move on. As a defensive tackle, who would you most like to face once you got them in the pocket? Because all these guys are elusive. Patrick, Josh, Lamar, and Joe Burrow. But obviously a couple of these guys are a little bit more athletic than the others. But as a pass rushing defensive tackle, who do you think would be the most likely to get on the ground and the toughest?
Ooh, that's a good question, because you would think Josh Allen would be the easiest to get on the ground because he's so big, but he's not, because he literally bounces off of guys. Like, he's tough. And then Joe Burrow, to me, when you look at all four of those quarterbacks, Joe Burrow has the best pocket awareness. He just has an eye for being able to shift up in the pocket, sidestep guys. Honestly, this might sound crazy. It's probably Mahomes. I'd probably rather, tackle Mahomes than Josh Allen, Burrow, or Jackson. I mean, Lamar Jackson speaks for itself, the elusiveness. We've seen what he did to Matt Milano, who's a linebacker, right? He had him dead to right. He just sidesteps him and makes Matt Milano fall on his face. So Lamar can maneuver in small spaces, so he's really hard to bring down. Josh Allen, just because of the pure strength, I kind of liken it to Ben Roethlisberger, where he was hard to just bring down. And even if you got him, he can still he has enough strength in his arm to still throw the ball away or even throw a completion down the field. I think when you look at this list, I think Patrick Mahomes, if I'm a defensive tackle thinking who would I think, quote unquote, would be the easiest to bring down. And again, Mahomes is not easy to bring down. Let me preface that, because I don't want this cut up. And they're saying, oh, Douzable said Patrick Mahomes is the easiest quarterback to bring. That's not what I'm saying. When you talk about the four quarterbacks, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, and Patrick Mahomes, I just think from a defensive tackle perspective, I would much rather face Patrick Mahomes in the pocket than those other three guys.
Yeah, there's a chance, 1 out of 10 chance you can one-handed sack Patrick Mahomes. You will never, in the history of your career, one-handed sack Josh Allen and probably Lamar. So I get it. By the way, all these quarterbacks, top 7 picks, and they could be top 4 picks if we were going to be nitpicky about it. All right, what are the biggest surprises from this top 100 list for you, Lige?
The biggest surprise to me was Cooper DeJean on the list. Now, when you look at it, he played out of his mind in the slot. But we know this, Rod, the slot corner position isn't a full-time starter. They're probably playing somewhere between 65 to 70% of the snaps all year long. And then when you look at Cooper DeJean, he also missed the first 4 games. So, he didn't play until week 6 because they had a bye week after week 5. Now, his first interception didn't happen until the Super Bowl, and it was a pick 6, so it was a perfect time to get one. And it was on his birthday, Rod. So I don't know if Pete if this was a trajectory of where he could potentially go with his career, and that's why he put him on the top 100. But I thought there was more deserving corners that were out there that have had a better body of work. Again, he missed 4 games, didn't have an interception until the Super Bowl, which was the right time to have one. And now there's talks that he could even potentially start at safety this year. So we don't even know, with him changing positions, what type of player he's going to be in the future. So that one was a little bit of a head scratcher for me.
Yeah, I mean, you're certainly not disagreeing with the notion that Cooper had a fantastic rookie season and was great in that Vic Fangio defense. But again, it's a 1-year productivity thing because you've only been in the league 1 year.
Correct.
That leads me to my guy, who may be this guy may be the best tight end in the NFL. Brock Bowers was at 22, but that's just 1 year productivity. And I just wonder, he was ahead of George Kittle. He was ahead of Trey McBride. He just got that big deal, who's now the second highest paid tight end after Kittle got his deal. Sam Laporta was awesome as a rookie year 2, a little less productive. And, of course, Travis Kelce is at 96. Any issues with Brock Bowers being 22? And look, man, in his defense, he played with some quarterbacks that are not starting quarterbacks.
Yeah, but he was the guy that was getting all the targets, too. I know they have Jacoby Myers, but Jacoby Myers is a bona fide number 2 receiver. So, yes, we can say he had inept quarterback play, but doesn't matter when you're getting targeted 10 times a game. You're still getting the opportunities to catch the football. I think this is entirely too high for a rookie tight end, again, going into his second year. You talked about it. George Kittle still went over 1,100 yards last year. He's still the best, complete tight end in all of football. I thought him being at 25 was asinine. He should have been a lot higher, especially with all the injuries that the 49ers dealt with, for him to still show that he could still be that type of productive tight end, because I believe he's had 4 1,000+ yard seasons. And he had another season where he went over 900 yards and I think didn't play in week 18. So he could have went over 1,000 yards that season as well. So he's been one of the most productive tight ends in the last, I would say, 7 or 8 years. And again, if you're doing this off a body of work, there's no way you can put one sample size year over what George Kittle has done for his entire career.
There's going to be a lot of cut-ups coming out of this. Lige Douzable talking bad about all these guys. All right, let's take a quick break, Lige. When we come back, we're going to look at some more of the players from the 2024 class who made this list, and there are a handful of them. We'll talk about that right after this. All right, Lige, back here with the first pick, talking about Pete Prisco's top 100 list. Comes out every summer. You can find it on CBSSports.com. There are 9 players from the 2024 draft class that made this list. That sounds pretty high, and it's a pretty impressive list. We talked a little bit about Brock Bowers being number 22 as a tight end. I felt a little rich for both you and me. But let's go through some of these other names, and I want to get your thoughts on if they're where they should be, a little too high, a little too low. And Jaden Daniels is next up among this 2024 class at number 33. I mean, lights out season, and there's no two ways about it. He's helping turn that franchise around in real time. But again, we're talking about 1 year body of work because you're a rookie. And I feel like the expectations are now he has to, arrows pointing up. And sometimes sophomore slumps happen. Does 33 feel a little too rich for Jaden Daniels?
I don't know if it does, just because he did something his rookie season I don't think anybody ever saw coming. Like that was, and most people will say that was the greatest rookie season we've ever seen from any player, more specifically at the quarterback position, to elevate the Commanders from where they were at. Let's not forget, they picked number 2 in the draft for a reason, right? They weren't very good. And Jaden Daniels had them on the cusp of, not only getting to the NFC Championship game, but if a couple things bounced their way, maybe even getting to a Super Bowl. So the way he was able to elevate this team, Terry McLaurin had, I believe, his first All-Pro season with Jaden Daniels, 13 receiving touchdowns, almost 1,100 yards. He also led them in rushing, too. That's the thing that people aren't talking about. He was a weapon X for them. Like, he led them in rushing, led them in passing, obviously, because he's the quarterback. And then in-game scenarios. Like, was there a better quarterback, more tailored or more specific to last year than Jaden Daniels in in-game situations? I don't believe there was. Like, that's why I said, and I put it on record, there's no quarterback that I trust in those playoffs last year for that specific playoff run more than Jaden Daniels, because he proved it week in and week out. So, again, we're a little iffy about some of these rookies or second-year players being so high on this list. I'm not sure I'm iffy about that one, because 33 seems that is like the right area. The only question is, can he do it again in the second year? Because people said the same thing about C.J. Stroud.
So as I look over Pete's list here of these rookies that have made it, mostly first-round picks until you get to Cooper DeJean, who was a second-round pick. And then our guy, Ladd McConkey, was a second-round pick. And then Bucky Irvin was a day 3 pick. He made it at 94. But before we move off of Jaden Daniels at 33, I'm going to name the other quarterbacks on Pete's list after Jaden Daniels. And just yes or no, tell me who would you rather have on your football team, okay, as your starting quarterback. Okay. Jaden Daniels or Justin Herbert?
Jaden Daniels.
Ooh, Jaden Daniels or Jalen Hurts? Somehow at 52. Disrespectful.
Jaden Daniels on the upside.
Man, producer Sharon's going to turn off your feed here. All right, Jaden Daniels or Baker Mayfield?
I love Jalen Hurts, too. I'm taking Jaden Daniels.
Jared Goff or Jaden?
Jaden.
Dak or Jaden?
Jaden. And to me, it's because of the upside. We don't know what his ceiling is, because in his first year, he went to the NFC Championship game. The rest of the quarterbacks you name, they've all been in the league at least 5 years. So we kind of have some semblance of what they're going to be. We don't know what Jaden Daniels can be in the future because he's only played 1 year. So based off the upside, I would take him over those other quarterbacks.
All right, and then finally, 90th is Jordan Love or Jaden. I'm assuming Jaden is there as well, even though you and I both like Jordan Love. But to your point, and also, look, Jaden gets all the credit in the world, no doubt about it. But Adam Peters drafted him, Dan Quinn's the head coach, and Cliff Kingsbury has been dialing up plays. And Cliff took a lot of guff in Arizona. Yes. Maybe it wasn't him. I'm just going to put that out there.
Well, the interesting thing is, too, I love that Cliff decided to come back, because he was one of the hot candidates to be a head coach, but he felt like there was unfinished business there. So you would assume second year for Jaden Daniels, he would take a leap in this offense in the second year.
All right, next up on the list as we work our way down here, pick 44. And look, I'm talking about some of these rookies that are too high. This dude might be too low. Brian Thomas Jr. at 44, given the way
You
he
think
played.
so?
He's one spot ahead of Malik Neighbors, his teammate at LSU. Malik had a huge year as well. But Brian Thomas Jr. is special, and I think he's going to help unlock Trevor Lawrence along with Travis. But I think more so than anything else, it's Brian Thomas Jr. So 44 feels like, is that about right or too high for you?
That's too high because, again,
Ooh.
what's the parameters for this list? Because if we go back to Patrick Mahomes, should he have been the number one player based off of just last year? Because we're really only talking about 1 year for Brian Thomas. Now, again, over 1,300 yards in those last 5 weeks really showed, they really finally untapped his skill set, showed that he's a true number one. Because I know a lot of people coming into the draft, people were saying he's a one-trick pony at LSU. But when I watched the tape at LSU, they just didn't use him in those manners. Like, he can run the digs, he can run the comebacks, but we saw the explosive ability, which we saw at LSU those last 5 weeks of the season, and that's where he really took off. I might add that Pete is also the mayor of Jacksonville, so he's really high on Brian Thomas Jr., which I love him as well, too. I thought he should have went higher. I remember talking to you, Ryan, and I think in my mock draft I had him slated at 16 to your Steelers the year before, and you were like, I'll take that all day. And they decided to pass on him, and we see what happened. So I think it's just too high for one – just because he's only played 1 year. You look at guys like Malik Collins that he's ahead of. Malik Collins, if he doesn't get hurt, was probably going to push the threshold of getting 2,000 yards last year. That's how dominant he was those first. No, I'm talking about Nico Collins.
Oh, Nico.
Collins,
sorry, I'm misunderstood you. Yep.
Season.
Gotcha.
First 5 weeks of the season, right, he had 567 yards, and then he went down with the hamstring, and then he wasn't himself again into the playoffs, and you saw how explosive he was in the playoffs. So you can't have a guy that has that body of work of Nico Collins, who has a 1,500-yard season and then also almost an 1,100-yard season, and then put Brian Thomas ahead of him.
I get it. No, that's right. I'm sorry. I misunderstood you. Yep, Nico Collins, and they drafted his clone in Jaden Higgins, your guy, who probably will end up blowing up because I wasn't as high on him as you are. All right. Fair enough. By the way, the other thing you mentioned about Brian Thomas Jr. at LSU, if you needed an inside fade in the red zone for a touchdown, that's when they dialed up Brian Thomas Jr. They let Malik Neighbors run all the other routes.
Facts.
But we saw, as you noted, that certainly Brian Thomas Jr. can do that. All right, Malik Neighbors at 45. Let's go to 54. Jared Verse, I mean, he's a grown man. He's playing like he's 35 years old and been in the league for 10 years and dominating. 54, that might be just about right, or maybe a little too low as well. Like, I don't know what there isn't to love about Jared Verse.
No, love Jared Verse. Now, the production wasn't there, right? I believe he only had like 4.5 sacks or something like that. But the pressure rate was one of the tops in all the NFL, right. And he proved that he could be a villain in the divisional game versus the Philadelphia Eagles. It kind of reminded me of Reggie Miller going into the Garden versus the Knicks, right? Because he called them out before the game and then went out there and was unblockable in the snow. Jared Verse put on a display of power, a display of speed, and just a display of pure nastiness that I really come to enjoy and love. And that was my question when he came out in the draft, right? We had this discussion. Would that speed to power translate? Boy, did it ever. Jordan Mailata is a grown man, and I've never seen somebody pick him up on 1 foot and put him on top of the quarterback. Jared Verse did that multiple times in that divisional round. So I understand why Pete put him there because I think it's a projection. But again, you can't have him in front of Will Anderson. Will Anderson is coming off 13.5 sacks, right? I think Danielle Hunter, he has him, Jared Verse ahead of him too. Danielle Hunter had 12+ sacks, and he's a guy that constantly gets 13 to 14 sacks a year. So again, it comes down to the parameters of what are you doing? Is it based off last year or is it based off body of work? And the way that this list was started in the beginning makes it seem like it's based off body of work. So if we're going by that parameter, I can't have Jared Verse ahead of either one of those defensive ends from the Houston Texans.
Yeah, and in Pete's defense, Danielle was 47, Jared 54, and then Will's 56. So he had him just ahead of Will Anderson. So I get that. All right, before we get out of here and take a quick break here, Lige, let's go to 93. And my guy, Ladd McConkey, every time I have to talk about Ladd, I bring it up. Patriots traded out of that pick to get Jalen Polk and let Ladd McConkey go to the Chargers. I would put Ladd higher than this because I know we're doing the one-year body of work conversation. This dude's going to have 1,200 yards every year. I'm just going to say it.
he really might, right? And we saw the explosive ability because people kind of penciled him into just being a shifty slot, but no, his yards per catch, if I'm not mistaken, were like 14 yards a catch. Like he's he's a very explosive receiver from the slot position. He's not just a slot receiver. So I understand why Pete put him there. I'm a little bit concerned that he didn't have Garrett Wilson though in the top 100. So Ladd McConkey made the list over Garrett Wilson, which when you talk about inept quarterback play, nobody's dealt with that more in the last 3 years than Garrett Wilson.
Yeah.
And yet, year after year, he gets close to or over 1,100 yards. So this is no disrespect to Ladd McConkey. I know we both loved him coming out of Georgia in the draft, and he proved that he's going to most likely be their number one receiver going forward. Again, just the 1 year body of work. It's hard for me to put a guy on that list over other receivers that I feel like are more deserving.
Yeah, and Garrett Wilson's a great example, of someone who should have been on the list who wasn't. So we're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we're going to talk about which 2025 rookies could end up making this list a year from now. We got some names to choose from. We'll talk about that right after this. All right, Lige, let's talk about which 2025 rookies, the class that just happened 6 weeks ago, who might make the list, Pete Prisco's top 100 list next summer. I'll let you start, and I think we got the framework for how this could play itself out, and that maybe informs the player you went with, because we just saw this young man do it at the same position this year.
Correct. Tyler Warren, and I think that's why I went with Tyler Warren, because we just saw Brock Bowers make it into the top 25 based off his statistics and how dominant he was. And I think Tyler Warren could do the same thing in Shane Steichen's offense. Heard rave reviews coming out of OTAs and minicamp about his versatility. We could even see this guy under center in a tush-push situation. Let's not forget, He played quarterback in high school, played even some center at Penn State last year. Go to that USC game, snap the ball, caught a touchdown pass down the seam, can use them in wildcat scenarios. I can't wait to see how Shane Steichen uses his skill set. I think he's going to put up big numbers all around, whether it's rushing, receiving, and let's not forget his impact is not just when he has the ball in his hand, it's when he doesn't have it in blocking. He's one of the best blocking tight ends coming out of the draft. So I think Tyler Warren has a real chance to potentially make this list next year.
I'm with you on that. Let me ask you this, Lige, as someone who played in the NFL for more than 10 years. Have you ever seen a player that's just quiet, kept to themselves, goes home after work, tends only to their family and their dog, and just all about football, and been the type of player that it feels like Tyler Warren's going to be, because he seems unaffected by any of the hoopla that comes with being a potential NFL superstar? Have you ever seen that throughout the course of your career?
Yeah, I mean, there's guys that are just only about ball. Like, again, George Kittle has a big personality, but he's like that. Like, when he's on the field, he's like a little kid, right? He just loves the game of football, and he's just locked into football, and he puts in the work as well. And that was one example I had. I was teammates with him his rookie year. He was literally all about ball. Again, really big personality, likes to have fun on that field, but he's just locked into football all day long.
You know, it's funny. You mentioned Tyler Warren and compared him to Brock Bowers and the potential for that rookie season to replicate what we saw from Brock. Brock, also all about ball. We talked to him at the Combine last year. And, a lot of the times when we're at the Combine, we're talking to these guys and trying to get some social clips. And we played a social game with Brock Bowers. He would have rather been anywhere on planet Earth than trying to, decide whether he was a dragon or a lion as his spirit animal. So, in a lot of ways, they're similar in that sense. Now, athletically, I think Brock is probably a better athlete, but good luck finding someone with more dog in him than Tyler Warren, because I think he has an opportunity, even though the quarterback situation could be in flux in Indianapolis. I don't think that's going to affect his ability to get those Brock Bowers-type targets. All right, I'm going to go. I'm basically going chalk here for one of these picks, but I'll throw another pick at you as well. We talked about Jared Verse as a guy on this list at 54. I think Abdul Carter feels like a layup. And, we talked about this after the draft, Lige. Like, they didn't necessarily need an edge rusher in New York in terms of all the needs they had. But it feels like even rotationally, if that's how he begins his career, he could be in a situation where he's getting 7, 8, 9, 10 sacks over the course of a season, even if he's only in there on pass rushing situations. Does that seem doable to you?
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. I saw a clip the other day where they kind of had like a NASCAR package where it was Brian Spider Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, and they actually put Abdul Carter in the interior of the offensive line. He hit that guard with a nasty spin move and got a sack on the quarterback. So that's the one thing that wasn't a question mark for the Giants was that defensive line. And we haven't even talked about Dexter Lawrence, who's on this list as well. Just imagine those four on passing downs, getting after the quarterback, and then the versatility that Abdul Carter has to be able to stand up in the interior and put that guard on an island, because most likely he's going to get the one-on-one, because Dexter Lawrence is the most feared defensive tackle in football. There's no way they're blocking him one-on-one. So Abdul Carter is going to get the one-on-one and really be able to use that athletic ability. And we saw it on that clip. The thing is, the biggest question for the Giants is on the offensive side, right? We know that defensive line is going to be humming for them.
I'll put this out there just as an addition to the conversation here. How do you feel about Jackson Dart? Like, again, we can't read too much into anything because it's May and June, but it feels like he's a long shot to be on the list a year from now.
Yeah, because honestly, he's not going to start the season. Russell Wilson is going to start the season. Everything I've heard from New York, Brian Daboll really loves Russell Wilson, the way he approaches the game, the professionalism that he has. The offense has actually been, I would say, had a burst of energy since Russell Wilson has got there. He's actually brought kind of like some stability to that position, which they really haven't had the last couple of years with Daniel Jones being there before he was ultimately released and then signed with Indianapolis this offseason. So Jackson Dart also coming from Ole Miss, kind of gimmicky offense. He has to learn the pro game, but all the intangibles are there now. The Giants have a gauntlet of a schedule, right? And the plan is right now for Russell Wilson to start, but let's not forget that if things get ugly and say they started off at 1-6 or 2-8, we could see Jackson Dart by like week 10, just because the GM and head coach are under fire and they're coaching and GMing for their jobs this year.
And by the way, Jackson Dart, who's a great football player at Ole Miss, no one wants to be thrown into that situation where you're 2-8 and you got to go out there and try to save some jobs under some pretty dire circumstances. All right. Malik Neighbors, obviously going to be a big part of that offense. He's on this list as a rookie. What do you think about the idea of my guy, Tedero McMillan, being on this list a year from now? It feels like Bryce Young, fingers crossed, has turned the corner. And he's got Xavier Legette. He's got JT Sanders at tight end. And now you have another big play receiver you can just throw jump balls to. It feels like this offense is starting to come together, Lee.
I'm so glad you brought up Ted, because I went back and forth whether to pick him or Tyler Warren. I just went with the versatility of Tyler Warren, and that's why I didn't pick Ted McMillan. But I go to some behind-the-scenes footage of the Carolina Panthers on draft day, and the Rams were trying to move up to I believe the number 8 spot to potentially either take a tight end or a quarterback or somebody, right? But the Panthers didn't like the offer, or they were considering the offer, but they loved Tet just a little bit more. And I think it's because of what you talked about. We saw Bryce Young really grow throughout the season, and in the back half of the season was probably playing, some of the best football of his career. And I would say he was probably playing up there with the upper echelons of quarterbacks. Now, they had some drop issues with Xavier Legette, but now with Tedero McMillan on the side, you could just throw the ball up to him. He's going to come down with those 50-50 jump balls. And there's nothing that's more comforting to a young quarterback when you're in duress and you can just throw it up and your guy's going to go up there and high point the football. Like, just give him an opportunity. He's going to come down with the football. People talk about his speed or lack thereof. I thought he was fast enough for somebody his size, and I think he's a savvy route runner, especially on those in-breaking dig routes as well. So I love the pick for the Carolina Panthers. You talk about that offense really coming together. They have a two-headed monster at running back. People forget Rico Dotto signed there this offseason. They still have Chuba there as well. Xavier Legette on the outside. Now you also have Ted McMillan. You talked about it. This offense is starting to come together. And Jatavian Sanders at tight end, watch out for him this year as well. I think he takes a step.
Absolutely. I'm with you. And I'm sort of laughing when you were talking about Bryce, because we know our buddy Pete, who made this list, was never on the Bryce bandwagon. He was talking about Will Levis. So I was shocked Will Levis didn't make the list, but maybe next year for Will Levis. I'm not throwing any shade at Will Levis. I'm throwing shade at Pete. You mentioned Ted and the speed issue, and I was thinking about the 2024 draft class and players who didn't make the list this year but maybe have a chance next year. And one of the names that came up was Marvin Harrison Jr., and that led me to this. What's the difference between Ted and Marvin Harrison Jr. in terms of physical skills? Because Marvin isn't a burner either. And why are we down on Ted, but everyone's high on Marvin coming out?
I just think Marvin probably has a more precise route tree, right? And again, he's been he was coached by one of the greatest, right? His dad is a Hall of Famer. So he was bred to be a receiver, and he's actually a little bit bigger than his dad as well. So he's a guy that can go up and pluck the ball. And we saw at certain parts of the season last year why he was so highly regarded, because there was times he did take over, but then there was times where he disappeared on film as well. So he's a guy, and supposedly he's put on like 10 pounds of muscle. Supposedly he just looks swole out there. So you would hope that aids him in maybe breaking some tackles as well, and maybe some screens he can, catch and run and get up the field and get into the end zone. But there were times last year where he took over games, and there was times he disappeared. So he just needs to be a little bit more consistent, and then he could potentially be on this list. The only thing that's kind of hurting him is they have one of the best tight ends in football, and they're going to get him the football.
Yep. All right, one last thing I'll ask you quickly here before we take a break. More likely to make the lists from the 2024 class based on the offense they're now sitting in, Caleb Williams or Bo Nix?
Ooh, that's a really good one, because we saw just a little bit of what Bo Nix can be in that offense. And a lot of people, including me and you, thought at 12 that was a reach. But if it was any team that it made sense, it was the Denver Broncos because of Sean Payton, because he's the perfect quarterback for that system. And now you have one of the most inventive offensive coordinators in Ben Johnson be calling plays for Caleb Williams. So you're thinking about the inventiveness and the skill set of Caleb Williams. I just think it's going to take a year plus for that offense to really gel like it needs to, because that's what it took in Detroit, right? Let's not forget, Detroit were the bottom feeders for a long time. When Ben Johnson was there as offensive coordinator, it wasn't until the second year where they started to kind of get that thing going, and they rallied like 7 of the last 8 off and almost got into the playoffs. So I'm going to give the slight edge to Bo Nix just because this will be his second year in the exact same offense, and they got better on offense and defense, which I didn't even think they could get better on defense. They did this offseason.
It's crazy to say, Lige, but the Broncos are one of the teams at the top in terms of the fewest issues heading into the 2025 season to sit here, which is bonkers given. Go ahead.
I was going to say, to that point, I actually have them dethroning the Chiefs in the AFC West this year. Just because of what we talked about. I'm just being honest. When you look at it, Ryan, last year, the game in Kansas City, Denver should have won. Remember, they had that special team snafu with the blocked field goal at the end. They should have won that game. They did win in week 18. Now, again, Kansas City didn't play in their starters because they were already locked in to the seed they were in. But when you talk about a top 5 defense, and then you add Jahdae Barron, Dre Greenlaw, and Talanoa Hufanga to that defense that was already a top 5 defense and led the nation in sacks, and then on offense, you add a guy like Evan Ingram. They've needed a tight end. Like Sean Payton has been needing somebody to stretch the seam. That's exactly what Evan Ingram does. So, now he's going to have the safety blanket there. People could talk all they want about Cortland Sutton. He's still doing it at a high level. And then we saw Marvin Mims really kind of come into his own in the back end of that season. J.K. Dobbins and R.J. Harvey are going to make some noise at running back this year, especially behind that offensive line that nobody talks about as the top 5 offensive line in football.
All right, producer Sharon, I got to take a break here to regroup because that was some wild talk right there. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll talk about some of the biggest snubs from Pete Prisco's top 100 list right after this. All right, Lige, we got 10 minutes to go here, so don't be blabbing on about the Broncos winning the Super Bowl. Ain't no one trying to hear that. All right, here we go.
I never said. I just said they're going to dethrone the Chiefs in the AFC West.
Let's talk about the biggest snubs from Pete's top 100 list, which you can find on CBSSports.com. Man, I saw your names, but they didn't stick out until I realized they weren't on the list. So give me who you got, and then we can discuss why Pete was wrong.
That's why they're the biggest snubs, because they're not on the list. I mean, Frankie Louvu, All-Pro last year, second-team All-Pro. I actually thought he should have been first-team All-Pro, and I get it. Zach Bond played out of his mind, but it's kind of like talking about the rookies from last year. It's one sample size year. Zach Bond was an outside linebacker that Vic Fangio decided to move to inside linebacker, and it paid dividends for him, and he became an All-Pro and played really well. But Frankie Louvu's been doing it at a high level. People haven't talked about him because he played for the Carolina Panthers and the Jets. Now he's finally in a bigger market, and people are realizing the talent he has. Let's not forget, Rye, he's one of the most versatile defensive players. Not only is he an inside linebacker, He had 8 sacks last year. He was second on the team in sacks. And the guy that led them in sacks is no longer there in Dante Fowler. So look for him to potentially even pick up more slack when it comes to pass rushing off the edge, because that's a skill set that he possesses. My other guy, Chargers offensive tackle Joe Alt, he was from the 2024 class. And when you're talking about a guy that made a seamless transition from left tackle to right tackle, Rob, when we talked about this pre-draft, I thought that was going to be an issue for him. It was no issue for him at all. He only gave up 1 sack and I believe only 4 pressures. When you talk about being dominant, and he was a big reason why the Chargers were able to run the football the way they were able to and also get into the playoffs when they were kind of revamping that entire team. So my thing is, if you're going to put some of those other rookies like Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. and Brock Bowers, this guy from an O-line perspective was more dominant than all those guys when you talk about what he did in protection. So I think he should have been on the list if you're going to go by that parameter of putting those other rookies on there.
Joe Alt was so good as a rookie that had he been in this most recent draft class, he might have gone as high as number 2 overall ahead of Travis and Abdul Carter. And I like realistically, that's how good he is.
For sure.
Yeah.
For
okay.
sure.
Okay.
Without
Good. And the other thing about Frankie Louvu, who was undrafted, I believe, we were comping him to Jalen Walker and Jihad Campbell, 2 first-round picks. That's how good he's been.
Correct. For sure.
So, all right, let's go to my list here.
On Frankie Louvu's name.
Amen to that. I will not disagree with you on that one. I was flabbergasted, if I can use a word my grandfather probably used at some point. How is C.J. Stroud not going to be on this list, Lee J?
I just think that's the thing. Like, and that's why I asked what the parameters for the list are, because what he did his rookie year was out of this world. And let's not forget, the Texans still went to the divisional round in the playoffs last year. It wasn't like they fell off a cliff and they didn't, make the playoffs. They won the wild card round and went to the divisional round. So, like, yes, he didn't have the same statistics, but his offensive line wasn't good. Like, he was getting battered back there in the pocket. So, yeah, I was surprised he wasn't on this list as well.
Okay, offensive line, huge issues. Tank Dell out for the year. You talked about the Nico Collins being banged up. At some point, you got to cut the man some slack. So, yeah, he's a – and look, let's realistically, like I've supported Justin Herbert being in the 50s. I'm taking C.J. Stroud over Justin Herbert, I think.
Without a doubt. Again, it's the upside. C.J. Stroud, first 2 years, made the playoffs back-to-back, getting to the divisional round each year. And just like Jaden Daniels, there's a reason why he went number 2 overall, because the Texans weren't good.
He was so good as a second overall pick that the owner in Carolina had to fire everybody because he was mad they took Bryce instead of CJ. That's how good he was. All right, my other guy, and I'll let you speak to this young man, Nnamdi Madubuike. All he does is ball out next to Travis Jones. We know about that defense being hair on fire. Should he have been on the list, in your opinion, as a former defensive tackle?
Yeah, he didn't have the gaudy sack numbers like he had the year before, but also Van Noy and Owe played a lot better this year. So, again, when you have multiple guys that can rush and get after the quarterback, the production is going to slightly go down. Plus, when you get 13-plus sacks, everybody's going to key on you because they know you can affect the quarterback. So that's, again, if you have Chris Jones, who only had 5 sacks, I believe, as a top 15 guy, there's no way Nnamdi Madubuike should have not been on a top 100 list because – yes, the production wasn't there, but he still made a huge impact on that Ravens defense, which, if I'm not mistaken, was still one of the top defenses in football, especially going back the last 10 weeks once they benched Marcus Williams.
Yeah, you didn't have to call Marcus out like that, but I was going to say Zach Orr really got that team going after Mike McDonald left. But all right, look, let's take one more quick break here. And when we come back, we're going to hit a little mailbag on the way out the door here, and we'll do that right after this break. All right, Leger, we got a few minutes left. Let's do some bold predictions for rookie and second-year players, mailbag style. So we asked for questions. You guys sent them in. I'm going to put them to Leger and see what he thinks. This comes from YouTube. First question. Jaden Daniels will lead Washington to the Super Bowl and defeat producer Sharon's Jalen Hurts Eagles in the NFC Championship game. That's a lot. So they're going to beat the Eagles in the championship game. They're going to win the Super Bowl. Is that even bold, actually?
But that's what I was about to ask. I don't even think that's bold because they went to the NFC Championship game last year. You would hope the second year in Cliff Kingsbury offense, and then they got Trey Amos in the draft. I actually talked to GM Adam Peters and was like, dude, y'all got a first-round talent in the second round. He was like, dudes, we feel the same way about him. And everything I've heard from the Commanders OTAs and minicamp, he's been out there strapping receivers left and right. So it's going to allow them to put Mikey Sanderstill back in the slot. So I'm excited for this Commanders team. A lot of people think they're going to have a sophomore slump. I think they'll be where they were last year.
And by the way, Trey Amos in the second round, first round pick. We talked about his first round pick for months leading up to the draft. Josh Connolly in the first round talent. So they are things are moving in the right direction, no doubt about it. All right, next up. I mean, it's bold in the sense that any team going to the Super Bowl outside of the Chiefs is probably bold. But to your point, they made a pretty deep run last year. The Commanders did. All right, next up, here's the next question from YouTube. This is a good one. Caleb Williams finally gets the Bears a 4,000-yard passer.
I think that's too bold. Just because, again, first year in the offense with Ben Johnson, there's an acclimation period. And anything we know about Ben Johnson, he wants to run the football. They're going to run the football to take the pressure off Caleb Williams. So I can see where he maybe throws for 3,800 yards, just right under it. 4K, I don't believe he'll pass 4K this year, though.
I don't know. You know what BMAC likes to say, like these, because Coach Dick LeBeau used to say to that Pittsburgh defense, OCs, they're too arrogant. They can't not do what they want to do in terms of push the ball down the field. But that's what
he runs the ball, though.
Yeah. You're right. He has a track record of doing that and doing it super successfully. They went out and bolstered the interior of that offensive line, so we shall see. All right, here's a good one. J.J. McCarthy leads the Vikings to 11 or more wins and at least a wild card playoff win. Now, that's bold.
I think it is, but when you look at the team surrounding, and we were talking about this earlier, we talked about the Houston Texans now having a lot of holes on their team. Literally, the only hole on the Vikings team is the quarterback. Like, they bolstered that interior of the offensive line, the defensive line. That defense was already a top 10 defense, and they got significantly better there as well when you add the two defensive tackles that they added in Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen. Like, it's going to be tough to run up the middle on them. It's going to be tough to pass on them because you got Van Ginkel and Grenard on the outside. And let's not forget, they took Dallas Turner. He didn't play that much last year. So you would hope that this year they're going to try to find ways to get him on the field more and more. Byron Murphy is one of the best corners in all of football that can play in the slot and on the outside as well. That'd probably be the one question mark for them is depth at the cornerback position. But the biggest question is the quarterback position because they have the O-line. They have two good running backs. They have three good pass catchers on that team. Like, everything is set for J.J. McCarthy to have success. He just can't screw it up. So I could see them winning 11 games. The only thing is, man, that NFC North is the best division in football. It's just going to be tough when you talk about the Lions and the Packers being right there as well. And then also you would think with Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson, they'd be significantly better. It's kind of bold, but I think they can do it. I think for my prediction, I had them winning 9 games, though, instead of 11.
Yeah, we talk about Kyle Shanahan. We talk about Sean McVay. We talk about Ben Johnson. KOC deserves to be in that conversation with what he is able to manufacture. Forget about Sam Darnold. I mean, he was winning games with Josh Dobbs, with Nick Mullins. So they have found ways to do it and put that quarterback in position. All right, got to make this one quick. We got about 30, 45 seconds here, but I'll ask you quickly. Drake May has a breakout season and leads the Pats to 9 wins and a 17 in the playoffs.
That's too bold. I just think – again, that team is going to be led by its defense. There's still some question marks on the offensive side. Yes, love their first-round pick. Will said he's willing to dive to protect his teammates. Morgan Moses is there. But that interior 3, there's some question marks. And, Ryan, we know that's the quickest way to get to the quarterback and affect him is in the interior of that offensive line. And there's major questions there.
I get it, man, but I think I'm drinking the Mike Vrabel Kool-Aid. I think the culture change is there. I think Drake May exceeded everybody's expectations last year. Will Campbell's willing to die for his quarterback. And you talk about what Ben Johnson likes to do. Josh McDaniels coming back. I think things are going to get back to normal. They're going to run the ball. They got Trey Henderson to go along with Ramondre Stevenson. And that defense, we haven't talked a lot about it. That defense is lights out. So
that defense is going to be legit.
I think I'm there. I think I'm there. All right. That's it, Lige. I appreciate you coming on and helping us out here. In the meantime, check out With the First Pick wherever you get your podcast. Scan that QR code, and we'll be back next week. See you guys then.